This is Study Hall. Whoa, no, it's not what you're thinking. Less teenage drama and more creative studio. Study Hall is a collective of curious creatives ready to tinker with norms to build impactful high craft work for all walks of life. From Fortune 500 companies like Airbnb to small startups. In other words, they're a brand expression studio run by Alex, Matt, and Jeremy. Oh, and there's Darius, but he skipped class today. In this episode of Low-Key Legends, we explore how branding has evolved, looking at what elements are timeless and what we can push and explore more of in 2025 and beyond. Our conversation hovers around the business of branding and how it intersects with today's tools and tomorrow's technologies. We cover how AI is impacting our industry and our team's productivity, and what might be next in the world of branding, ditching screens and moving into a future of new interfaces. So make sure you subscribe right here on YouTube or wherever you're listening so you don't miss out on more great conversations. But enough talk. Class is in session. Alex, Jeremy, Matt, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here.
Excited to be here.
Very excited.
This is really like the most important, essential question that's been on my mind. How thick are your pickles?
Pretty dang thick.
They are.
Are we talking like girthy boys? What are we doing here?
They're.
Really good boys.
You might see an asterisk next to thick pickle that leads you to a note telling you that they are emotionally thick. They're metaphorically and emotionally thick. It's not a literal measurement. They are, emotionally speaking, the thickest pickles in the world.
And just so that like the audience doesn't think that I'm hitting on all three of you at once and getting into very, very intimate details, you created a project in-house called Thick Pickles. You did a bunch of 3D animations and a website. It won Site of the Day on awards. It's beautifully done. I'm assuming that this was just an internal project that you just were like, fuck it, let's just make Thick Pickles. What is the origin story of this brand?
I'll start. Jeremy and Matt, you chime in when appropriate. But I will sometimes have a habit of, if there's really nothing else to do, I'll see what domain names are available just to see like what I can buy. And years ago, I was doing exactly that and looking around and just seeing what's available, typing in random stuff that popped into my head. And I happened to type in thickpickle.com and was shocked to see that it was available. So I bought it and I sat on it for years. And then we were having, we have lots of discussions at the studio about like, plans for the future, what kind of clients we want, what we want to do. And we realized like, there's a lot of fun to be had in the food and beverage space. We haven't been getting a lot of those. We hadn't at the time been getting a lot of that kind of work. And at the same time, on the like interactive side, I think we were yearning for something that let us really flex our skills that our current at the time, the clients that we had for various reasons wasn't necessarily letting us do that. So I remembered that I owned thickpickle.com. Like maybe we just start our own fake pickle brand. And then it slowly became more and more real. And I don't know, we might actually end up making some real pickles someday.
Yeah, where's the pre-order button so I can get the first batch of thick pickles?
It's coming soon. We are going to do it. I think that's the big thing too, is like, I think there's just this moment for clarity with brands and honesty of like copy and things that you just kind of miss as like a consumer, that like, obviously we know Liquid Death, know and love it. And it's like incredible to see like how they kind of capture their audience and just run with it and don't look back. And I think that's like kind of what we wanted to do with the Thick Pickles too as well. And Matt was coming up with all the copy as well, and just how kitschy and funny and ridiculous it is, and just leaning into it. Like, because it's what we want, right? Like if you interact with pickles for 5 seconds on the shelf, you're going to be determined whether you're going to be a loyalist or not.
If you imagine going down the pickle aisle, all the things kind of blend in. They all kind of have the same look and feel. A lot of old world branding. So just the thought of these like neon bright colored packages with big, bold, shiny chrome type just like screaming at you. I think it was just, how do we, back to that liquid death reference, just get in your face with pickles, which is kind of a weird thing to think about doing. But it was just so fun to be so expressive, right? To write all that tongue-in-cheek copy that sometimes is hard to run by the client, just being really silly with it. It also touched every part of the studio, which was great, just getting every single person involved, from like the 3D to the motion to the dev stuff. So it was just like one of those fun things that just blossomed over time, and then got a good response. So
I find that if you have like the spare time or make the time to do them, the passion projects really pay out in like ways that you don't even imagine. And it may not be like an immediate thing. Maybe it's like the immediacy is that it gets a little buzz and maybe there's an award or two. And like your friend pats you on the back and says like, good job, bud. But I mean, down the road, it probably does lead to like some bigger stuff. Like even if it's just like a case study, it's like, hey, we did all this shit. Like we have a ton of capabilities. Like someone's going to want to hire you for something like that or similar and generate some pretty good traction.
Honestly, I've been shocked at how useful it's been for us with even with just like lead generation and with getting bigger, cooler projects with the clients that we already have. Like it happened multiple times that, I mean, paraphrasing, but we've had a lot of clients come to us being like, hey, if we loved Thick Pickle, we're convinced like if you can make pickles this cool, you can make blank this cool. If you can make, if you can make pickles this cool, you can make HVAC look that cool.
Yeah.
It's like we've gotten a lot of that, and it's been nice to just like be able to show off skills, show off talents, show off a lot of the aspects of our studio that a lot of our clients, because we're still pretty young, a lot of people don't know exactly what we're capable of. So that's been great to show.
It does seem that like playfulness is kind of baked into a lot of your work, and even kind of the fundamental copywriting and visual language and styling of the studio. So I'm curious if that was a foundational pillar of study hall and how it kind of translates into your client work and projects as well.
I mean, I think the big thing within terms of style is that, I think it's hard to feel original when you start to boil down into minimalism. And I think there's a lot of ownability. Like if you think about a market, Instagram and all the social channels, and how saturated the market is with brands that look awesome. And it's just like, how do you really stand out now? I think you're getting a brand that has great type, great colors. Like, what is that additional layer that really makes you unique? And I think one of the things that we really try to capitalize on for our clients is really developing like either it's a maximalist or some unique style that's completely different in a way that has like a lot of layers to it. I think you kind of get that from a lot of our different clients. And I think when you look even at our case studies, they're vastly different. We don't really have like a particular style that we're leaning into. But I do think that extra layer is really important when we start to think about the market as a whole for these people to stand out. I think like, how are you going to stand out with, just beautiful type and a beautiful logo now? I think you really have to go that additional mile to really see what it can kind of live and breathe into.
I think a lot of what Jeremy's getting at too is like, we as a studio really value brand strategy. It's a huge component of like any brand project we do, if we can squeeze it into the client's like budget. But yeah, we really push brand strategy hard, and the strategies that we come up with often call for it. They call for personality, and the clients want that from us. Where it came from, I think, is just, it kind of happened organically through a mix of my Jeremy, Matt, and my personalities and taste and desires.
In that brand strategy kind of phase of your branding work, what is it that you are doing with the client to pull out that personality, or how are you honing in on a specific aspect of their brand to kind of pull it forward or make it stand out? I guess what would be your way of approaching that?
Our clients often ask us, how do we differentiate? That's a big ask a big question that we're trying to answer in a lot of our brand strategy, is how do we differentiate? And it often leads us to personality, voice, tone, right?
Just to build on that too, I think we go really deep for audits on what we tend to net out with, and like showing the client of like all of these competitors and what they look like, what they feel like, how their strategy, how they're positioning with copy, and how they're sort of strategizing within the market and like their consumer. It does sort of iron itself out to show like this is the reason why you need to identify with a certain personality and have that particular voice. And I think it's really just that legwork. Honestly, it's as simple as that, of doing the research and the homework to not only deliver a great positioning statement, but have that paired with just really explaining, like just doing really strong involved work of like auditing what these competitors are doing, and ultimately like it does lead you down that road. So it's just like I think, especially when you sometimes worry with subjectivity within clients, it really focuses on like what they need to do. And that way we create really a symbiotic partnership that like allows for the objectivity to be paired with also that personality.
It depends on the insight too. Like sometimes the insight just begets like playfulness. Like I think about one of our clients where we ended up kind of framing something as a digital renaissance. And that just, if you think about that, that sounds extravagant. That sounds like this big illustrious kind of thing. And so the work just tended to flow that way. And I think, again, it's probably a combination of our personalities sometimes, like kind of marrying some of that playfulness to those insights. But, we always try and connect those things and make sure that it's just lining back up to the client and having its meaning and purpose.
There's two metaphors that we really like. One for brand strategy, the way that we sell it a lot is like explaining like we wouldn't film a movie without a script, right? The brand strategy is the script for the brand. Like that's what it is. It's telling us objectively why we should make decisions versus subjectively. And then the other metaphor we really like is like doing a brand or a rebrand for a client is like us coming in as a stylist and redoing your entire wardrobe, right? As people, we have a closet full of clothes that represents us, and maybe like we have our casuals, we have our formals, we have whatever, but it is all representative of us as people. And no matter how you dress someone, like if their personality doesn't exist, then what's it all for, right? So we need to dress the person, but we also need to give them personality with the brand strategy.
I can't help but notice that, Alex, you and Jeremy are dressed the exact same.
Oh, man. The decades of being a designer and working with color, it just like eliminates color from like a lot of my closet, I'll be honest.
I've had to actively try hard to have less black in my wardrobe. I'm doing it today. We're wearing a lot of colors today, but it's a newer thing for me.
Since moving to a beach town, I'm just going to lean into the crazy shirts and see what happens.
I should have grown a beard too, so that Jeremy and I look more alike.
Everyone at study hall just dresses the exact same. The uniform. The interesting thing is I feel like that branding has really been evolving quickly over the past few years. And you had mentioned how brands look so good now and people are like so talented and are leaning into all these different technologies and strategy, whether it's just there's more capabilities of getting good web design from a template or from like Webflow or anything like that. But also people have fully embraced kind of like 3D, and there's a lot of that in the space as well. And I guess, in your opinion, what will a brand's biggest strength be in the future? So 2025 and beyond.
I feel like motion is becoming just something just inherently just part of brands now. Just it's kind of that last piece of them feeling living and breathing. And I think you're seeing the beginnings of that now, but I think it's going to become even more ingrained into all those moments. It's just like, it's the life behind it. You build all these pieces and they're connected in a certain way, and it's almost like this moving ecosystem once you put all the pieces together. But it's something we've been seeing like more and more. It's something we value highly, and so we've been putting more and more time into it, and it's changed our process over time. Like, for instance, for web projects, getting motion early on in concepting, even like when you're just pitching your first concepts and bringing them like to life, like right off the bat. So just getting it involved earlier. But it's something that I think we've all been passionate about here, and it's something I think we'll continue to see into 2025.
And I think even to build on that, like, I really think that, brands are going to be in 2025 and beyond is like, what can brands do in the Z space, if you will? So like thinking about the three-dimensional space that like we're really, rudimentary levels with like using like the Vision Pro, for example, and like, well, a little bit low adoption, but like I definitely see that brands are going to need, like from a brand identity studio perspective, they're going to need to have the capabilities to be into 3D, because it's just going to be operating in such a different lane of like how these brands are going to be showing up, whether it's like advertisements from like, your Vision Pro, like what does that look like? So like you start to think about advertising being more in like the three-dimensional way, but maybe it still looks flat, but there's also this other dimension. And I think there's something so interesting, like as we start to see the industry push out of screens, like I think we're all really tired of like sitting behind the desk in front of our computers. And I think there's such an appetite for us to like push forward. So I'd imagine branding is really just going to evolve. I think like when you think of like the identity studios prior to having computers, what that looked like. I think that transition is like, I think we're really hungry for that to happen. But I think it just takes more of a I think the broad audience of just like being able to adapt to it. And I do think we will move away from iPhone fully soon, and like, what is that next step? What is that new layer of like the medium,
Yeah, I mean, we have like the Ray Bans as well. So I mean, like a bunch of this shit is coming that might actually look less goofy than an Apple Vision Pro, and people might actually want to wear on the street. So,
what's your opinion on that, Britt?
Oh, I'm kind of in the camp of motion as well, and it was something that I was just thinking about is tying that into some of the first round brand concepts that we're doing for a client coming up. And I was just like, this looks like it's moving already, but if it was moving, it would just be so much more effective. So it was more like, we have this idea, let's just test it to make sure that it's like hitting the type of brand values and in the type of accesses that we want to push, and try to get it, I don't know, to use the This Is Spinal Tap reference, just dial it up to 11 and hopefully blow the socks off the client, like in brand meeting 1. And so I think that's super important. I really like also a lot of like the 3D stuff that's going on. And I guess there's a million ways that you could use that type of style to effectively portray stuff. But I'm curious if we're going to, be a couple years down the road and then we're just like, fuck this shit. Like, I never want to see another piece of 3D again. And I don't think that's going to be the case, but like, that's just something that's on my mind. I'm just like, do I like this because it's like a part of the now? Or do I like it because it's just always going to be interesting? Because if I saw like that 10 years ago, I'd be like, this is the dopest shit I've ever seen. And I probably did, like in a movie, but like for a brand or on web, like it feels like so fresh and so different. So it's a little bit of like love and also a little bit of like, ooh, I don't know if that is going to have the longevity, but I hope parts of it do. So it's my take, my hot take.
And I think the other answer to your question for me is like, it goes back to like how saturated the industry is, how saturated marketing is, all of the different platforms that people are being served ads and content, and brands are trying to make themselves get more awareness to themselves. So it's really just kind of like a game now, like figuring out how to differentiate, how to get in front of more people, how to get in front of your target audience. There's like so many incredible tools now for all of that, but it's because it's so saturated. So it's way harder, right? So I think there's a lot of paths forward for all of that for differentiation, but yeah, like Matt said, like motion is going to be a big one. I think if you look at like web design as an example of like, it used to be that we didn't have the technology to put really, really cool content on the web. Like we just, bandwidth wasn't high enough to put videos all over your website and incredibly high res photos. So you had to design the coolest website you could with HTML, right? Which meant like you had to have the glossiest buttons and crazy like borders around everything and stuff. And then it slowly moved into like, all right, now we do have the technology. Now websites have gotten maybe a little more minimal. We can use cooler type, and it's all about like the assets you put in there, right? It is those like big 3D backgrounds and motion pieces and how you dynamically move type and the cool interactive experiences you can give people. If you follow like that trajectory into the future, I think it's that times different screens and taking it out of screens entirely. So it's about the content, I think.
Yeah, probably when we get to that specific point out of the screens entirely, then like there are different limitations, and then also the thinking will probably be like there are no limitations. So what do we do with this open air space?
Yeah, it makes me wonder like how we're gonna find balance in the future. If you think about like the evolution of AI, maybe at some point you just have this earpiece in here, and it's like a like a Siri type thing that knows everything about you and it's talking to you. Is that going to serve you ads at some point? Is it going to talk to you? Like, you know what I mean? Like there's going to be this interesting space we start to enter, especially for like vision enhancement type stuff. Like, how do we not like feed the beast the wrong way because we'll be part of that machine, right? If we're working in that space. And so it's just a really interesting, like, where's it going to go kind of thing as we just add those layers of like design and marketing and advertising in and just weave it into our lives, like even more personally. So it's an interesting, just like emerging space to think about.
Yeah, you're gonna see a digital ad with your, let's say, Vision Pro or Ray-Bans glasses, but you're also with your regular eyes gonna be seeing a Subway ad. Also, it's like, can't escape. Kill me now.
Zuckerberg's like, gotcha, bitch.
Also with branding and what I said earlier, it's like I'm very aware that I look at maybe more brand and content and design than the average just human being. Us being in the design space, we look at a lot of that stuff in general. But I mean, to someone seeing it like maybe a piece of 3D on a brand that you would never expect, like that would be like the coolest thing or really inspiring or revolutionary. So it's just like, how do you apply it to an industry or vertical that has never seen that style or that approach before? And like that makes it fresh and unique too. And then ultimately you can do that with anything. So, I mean, taking music, taking any art form or medium, you can go back in history with your own design stuff and bring out like old references or styles that haven't been prominent because of maybe just popular culture, or maybe it's just that something that isn't prominent in that part of the world because of whatever reason. And then that becomes something new and fresh and can rise to the surface. I think about that type of thing with music a lot, where it's just like, oh, this is clearly like referencing, let's say, Middle Eastern music, but I would never expect that to be influenced in a hip hop song. And it's just like, oh, it's fresh and new.
That's something we talk about a lot, is like, how do you, again, like differentiation, right? Making something cool that everybody likes and wants to look at. But how do you do that when certain industries, like people have a very subconscious and deep-seated understanding of like what makes that good? For example, like things where like old world brands make it seem more authentic, right? Like, I don't know. I was telling these guys the other day that like I was trying to pick which sharp cheddar to buy at the grocery store, and there was like Tillamook, which is a great cheese brand. Like they're great. All their dairy products are incredible, and they have a really, really pretty brand. And they feel like the hot cheese brand right now. And then right
Mhm.
next to it was another sharp cheddar that was like super old world looking branding. It was like Great Lakes Cheese Co. or something. And it looks like it's been around forever. Like, I kind of want that one. I mean, I know Tillamook is good. I love the brand, but I kind of want the old one. Same thing with like barber shops. Like,
Mm.
you can really tell a difference between um when when something's new and going for like an old world barbershop, but you can tell it's a chain that's just like trying to make it look
Yeah.
that way, versus like the one that's actually been around for like 50 years and has the same pinstripe wheel
Mhm.
thing that they've had for 50 years, and the same like chairs that they haven't changed out yet.
It just seems like so much more legit. Oh, what is it like? I think it's called like the Lindy effect, and it's named after the Lindy Diner in New York, which had been around for like 100 plus years through the Great Depression, and it was named after that because of the staying power. And the principle of like the Lindy effect is that the longer something exists, the more likely it will to survive and exist into the future. And that's what I think about like in branding a little bit as well, but also like running Rogue. I'm like, all right, you're into 5 years. If you could make it to 10, you'll make it to 15.
I worked on a brand probably like a decade ago now, where they had a really interesting problem where they were like a big baseball hat brand
Mm.
that this brand exists in like most baseball stadiums, but they never invested any money in branding. They had the same logo since like for one of their sub brands, they had the same logo since like 1871, which was crazy, and it was not a good logo. Like, you think like, oh my god, it's so old. Like, everything was good back then. Like, beautiful typography, probably it wasn't very good. And we ended up doing like all of this brand sprinting for it, like all hands on deck. We had all these designers designing incredible, beautiful logos. They couldn't really, we couldn't, they couldn't agree on one because they were so scared to like lose all of this equity. And what we kind of pitched to them was like, all right, well, we've collectively made like 100 logos for you in the past couple weeks that all look like they're trying to like get you this old world style. We ended up just saying, use all of them. Pretend like these are all of the logos. It was like their like 100-year anniversary or something as a company. Like, use all of them. Have this big 100-year anniversary like campaign. Show all of these logos that you've had over the past 100 years. Not really. We just made all of them in 2 weeks, but it worked out. We printed all of them on like the like tissue paper that they ended up putting in the packaging, and yeah,
That's cool.
It was a cool little trick.
It's reading between the lines. It's like a healthy little fib.
That's like thick pickle. You know, a lot of people thought it was real. So the healthy little fib.
If you make it convincing.
Britt, there's something you said a couple points ago that was interesting about just like being a designer and just being so immersed in that design world. Like, my Instagram feed is just filled with all these things. I'm following studios and these aggregators, like the brand identity, you know, awards, all these things. And we're seeing it like all the time. And it's interesting when you think about that much amount of sharing. Like, we're sharing at light speed now. So like, it's like helping design culture be shared easier, and it's moving faster, and we're all kind of seeing these ideas together and kind of ping-ponging them back forth. So it's kind of led to like homogenization in some formats, but it's also led to like, it's just such a birth of creativity. Like, it's probably just, again, I'm following so many things, but it just feels like I'm just seeing so much good design every day, all the time. And we're all feeling that together. And it's just an interesting time. Like, we see this in TikTok. Like, there was a point made the other day about how, or I just saw someone make this point that like slang is almost kind of gone, because slang's like typically like regional. But right now, because of things like TikTok, all the kids are just sharing the same words. So everyone across the United States is just saying the same stuff. And it just goes back to that point of like, we're sharing at light speed. And it's been this like amazing tool for us to kind of progress design culture, you know?
I think it's helpful, and then it's also one of those things that can be demoralizing if you allow it to be, where you're just like, shit, I'm never going to make something as good as that. But it's just like they're a completely different person or team of people in a different part of the world using different references. It's just like with a different client, or they just made it with no limitations. Like there is no client. So I mean, like, what are you gonna do? You just got to get back on the fucking horse and go, like ride.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I ask myself when I see that really cool work, like, how did they get there? How did they find that right client? Typically, it feels like the marketing lead at the company is the one that's going to allow you to do the work. Like, it's going to be that first part of the funnel. So if your marketing lead, whoever it is, your CMO, whatever, is like super creative and wild, you probably get some of that work. And you just think about like, what was that path to get all that done? What was the strategy? Who was your design team? Like, sometimes I see the work and I'm just like, jaw hits the floor and you're like, that's amazing. How do we go do that? How do we go figure out how to get something done like that?
Britt, I'm curious too if you feel like, what a skill set, like in terms of a skill set for a designer that's like, now or coming in the future, if like you think AI is a skill that they're going to need to know?
That's a really good question, because I was thinking about this the other day. I was just like, if I were, I don't know, like 18 again, like what would I be putting all my eggs into one basket? Like when I was 18, I went all like into web design and like trying to get good at that, and I realized like once I started a company, I went all into like business systems and trying to do leadership and teamwork and building and finding the right people, and then backed off of like designing. And so now I don't even know how to use half of the things in Figma. So it's like, oh, I have to go back and like be a designer again and try to like pick up some of those skills. But to answer your question, the AI aspect, I feel like, I haven't gone too deep into this. I definitely can and will in the future, but I think understanding the fundamentals of it so that you're not like left behind and be like, oh, like that old man screaming at the clouds, like, well, how did this happen? Like I think you should at least be a part of the new tools that are coming out and understand them. So how do I prompt? I think is a fundamental skill that you could have as like you're not even like being a generalist. You can be a specialist, but still understand that. And just kind of keeping on top of, okay, so there's one for video, there's one for images. What are kind of like the best things? Even if I'm not like an expert, I still can like help to art direct or get to a basic level of showing decently created things with that tool. But I do think that it's always just like a jumping off point. I'd be a little bit sad if it became like the primary tool, because I feel like it'll only get you so far. Maybe you have to bring it into other programs or change it up or rework it with a group of individuals or by yourself in order to make something that truly stands out. Because I don't know, I've been thinking about it. It does create like original things, but it's only with the information within the model. So if you don't have new information in the model, then can you really create something that's original? But then I guess on the flip side, you could say, aren't we all just working with like the same reference material out in the world? But then I think it's not quite true, because it's like, I'm a guy who's white, based in Cape Cod, who likes surfing and Dungeons and Dragons, and I've like nerdy shit and I like design. So maybe my references are more focused and honed through my lens. And I think that individuality is kind of the thing that makes things unique. And I've gone on a long-winded rant about this at this point, so I'll pass it off if anything in there even answered your question, Jeremy.
No, it does. I mean, I think it's just it's top of mind, and I think you're spot on when you think of especially like production studios and the early sketches and concepting, or you think about prototypes for product or for brand. It's like early revs of some initial ideas, and like hasn't creeped in, I would say, into that like, if you want to be the best, you should be original, right? And I think that's still going to run true for the life of whatever we are doing in design. But I do think, like, generally speaking, from a practical sense of maybe they don't have the right education, or maybe they don't have access to the best creative director or the best agency, I do think there is, like, I see the value of it overall, of bringing up some design, especially within like app design, or, you know, maybe just like someone's skills to try to start to understand how the process works and how you can get to maybe like a really good result. I don't think, you know, if you measure and you want to do the individual, that will definitely exist. But I think there is actually, like, if you flip it, there is a benefit, I would say, to generally speaking for globally of access and like scalability for something that could be really great, right? Like you could start to understand why this is great design outside of just listening to YouTube videos, or maybe you're doing one online class. You know, I think there is like some of that is like that is important, that maybe it doesn't happen already. It doesn't exist, right? And I think that's where I find it interesting, because I always play devil's advocate with it, because I don't like it from an originality standpoint. But on the flip side, from a general practitioner standpoint, like someone that may not have access to something that's really great, like this is going to be a really awesome tool for that.
Yeah, I think about it from the perspective of my father-in-law wants to write like a little kid's book. I was like, oh, he could ask me to do it, but there's no way that I would have time. So I would probably be like, oh, you should check out AI and just like play around with prompting. And he'd probably have fun with it. Like, might as well. Like, just like enter in what you think is cool. Maybe we can do it together in like an afternoon. We type in some stuff and try to get to a style that you think is interesting. And so, I mean, like, I like that it is universally giving creativity to people who thought that they could never be creative.
Right.
And I think that is a really interesting kind of like, okay, so we have this as a tool. It's a great equalizer. So where do we go from there?
It is interesting seeing like how creatives have started to harness it already, though. I mean, like we've used it for like storyboarding things, because you know, when you had to sell an idea to a client back in the day for like a short 30-second spot and it's a film, you had to go find stock photography or draw things, and now you can put one centralized character in, write your storyboards, and have it spit out all this imagery that tells that full story. And so like that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's helping us like storyboard in a way, because sometimes clients, until they actually see it, they can't visualize it, right? They can't see, they can't feel the lighting you're talking about. They can't understand spatially like where this person is, or kind of the scenery around it. Sometimes it's hard for them to kind of connect the dots, right? And that's why showing things that are already animated versus talking about it being animated work well. And so it's been really interesting seeing like, if you are a creative, like how are you using these tools right now? And I think it's still far from being this final answer to things, right? Like I still think it's supplemental. There's probably going to be a scary point soon where that starts to change. I've already seen some stuff where like you can just type something in and it spits out a 3D model and you can animate it, which is just mind blowing.
Yeah.
So Alex,
Well,
what's your job?
So I'll say this, like the caveat here is that all of our opinions about AI have a shelf life right now because it's moving so quickly. We don't know if what we think about it right now is going to stay the same once it like technology improves tenfold in like a few years or whatever happens. But for now, I think what keeps me feeling safe is like remembering the point of us as designers is we take what the client asks us for and we use our knowledge to put it in front of their user, customer, viewer, whoever, in a way that we think is going to be most effective, right? The client is asking us to do that. They're asking us, they don't necessarily care what happens between those 2 points, how we get that job done. Like no client is ever specifying that I use Photoshop versus Illustrator versus Figma versus, I mean, sometimes they ask us to use like Google Slides versus Figma, but you get my point, is like how we get from what the client is asking us for to using our skills to put something in front of their audience doesn't necessarily matter. If that's AI, that means that the client either can't control AI to do it themselves or they don't have the time to. But I think as studios, as agencies, we work with a clientele at a certain level where it's not just about like, oh, I need an illustration to put on Instagram, or like the we don't work with the same audience that like would be using Canva to do all their own stuff.
evolving to the point where you have a clientele who is optimizing for great work, but also like their time, I think is like an important thing. What is important to the client? They don't want to have to like babysit you. They just want great results and great work.
We're also like really far from AI being able to take over an entire like brand and go to market campaign.
Yeah.
Like with thousands of assets and like rules around how logos work, where to put them, all the different like sizes and you know, it's these are huge projects that require a lot of thinking and a lot of customization of a lot of different elements. AI is just not there yet. Like, yeah, we may have like, okay, your background images for this website, like use these 10 AI images that we made, which we wouldn't necessarily do ever, but you could do that. But there's like a whole other 90% of the project that needs to be thought of.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that point that you brought up is that like you wouldn't necessarily do those thousands of assets, but maybe only 2 people need to do those thousands of assets. I think that's like the productivity of it is wild. I mean, you're already seeing it with like help desk platforms, right? Like they're eliminating all these physical, like all the physical people, like the agents, right? Then they have one person that has like 20 of these AI helpers. And it's like, I think that's where it's like, you know, I think there will be you know, maybe in 5 years from at least a production standpoint, you could see the legwork just being kind of eliminated to some extent.
For AI to take all of our jobs, clients would actually have to know what they want. These opinions have a shelf life, but for now, that makes me feel safe.
I think it's been interesting too, just like the uncanny valley effect with some of these images that are being produced by AI. There was a company that updated their website recently, and we all looked at it, and Jamie was like, "That's AI. That's all AI generated." And we were like, "Yeah, I think you're right." Found out it was a real illustrator. So it's like the reverse is happening, where you think it's AI, but it's actually just because maybe stylistically it almost looked like it could be, which was like the flip of it. You know, usually it's like the other way around.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of like weird to like look at all the stuff that's coming out now and start questioning. Like in your head, you're like, did they just use AI for that, or is that a real illustrator? It's like kind of weird.
But one thing I wanted to flip the script back with your question, Jeremy. If you were to tell like a young student in design school, like what they should be focusing on or what may be a good avenue to focus on, what would you say?
It really comes down to, you know, I think the technical side you can learn on YouTube, for example. I think it's incredible that if you have access to go to these really amazing private schools that are art schools, and sure, that's an awesome path if you can potentially do it, but I don't think that's mandatory. And I do think from the technical side, you can learn all of that on YouTube. There's enough, you know, education out there, whether, you know, they have these different courses in different languages. And I think like, ultimately, I think it's just really diving into the conceptual thinking that I think is the part that you kind of miss if you don't go to the art schools or if you're not learning from a really amazing creative director. So I think like really kind of flipping it on its head. I know that there's a lot of talk in the industry about like, you know, how you can leverage poetry into strategy. And I think it's an interesting concept. I think Boeing did that in the 70s when they brought in a poet and wrote a great poem. But I think beyond that, like, I think it's really just kind of like navigating through literature. I feel like just reading and learning and like reaching out to like myself or study hall and like asking questions. You know, I think there's a lot of people that, you know, they don't realize they may have access to. And I think the conceptual part, I would say, is probably what can separate you as a designer. Because I think anyone can make cool shit all day long. Like, I think that's awesome. And I really appreciate that people could do that. But to develop that idea behind it, you know, and like the concept of like why this should exist versus just like, this is really cool, so it should exist. I think that's what designers should focus on, you know, because then, you know, you have this, you could potentially have this soft skill, which ladders you up in your career exponentially faster because you can get marketers to understand, you could get CMOs to understand. And I think that's usually where it kind of falls flat. I feel like a lot of people kind of they'll learn it, and everyone learns it at a different pace. But I would say that being able to communicate an idea to your mom about like what you do, and like, or your dad or whatever, like it could be pretty hard, to be honest. And usually, like, I think a lot of people give up before they really get their parents to understand what they do. So I think it's those really soft skills that are the hardest part that a lot of people overlook, whether they need to read philosophy or English lit, like anything. I think there's so many nuggets of inspiration in that will you can apply through your technical skills, and then you truly have something original, right?
Mm.
I think that's the cool part, because that idea didn't originate from a studio. It didn't exist before because it came from something completely else. And that's where you will just be just at another level, and I think that's what we try to operate as too, is just like coaching some of these people. And I think like, soft skills, again, like we can all learn them. They're really, I feel like they're the easy part, I would say, is just as important. But I think that, the conceptual thinking is really where the money's at.
Honestly, I try to think of my role as like the person who may be putting in some of those extra hours to get to the root of the emotional root of what it is that this client does and why it matters. And I feel like that's a lot of our brand strategy, is kind of getting to the root of, besides profit, like, why do you do what you do? Like, because obviously you have to make money. That's par for the course. You're running a business. So like, why the hell does this matter? Why should anyone care? If you can translate those ideas both into the written word in a seamless, simple way that anyone could try to understand, and well, not try, can understand, and then also apply that to some visual concepting that can share that messaging and they work in tandem, like, you're golden. I feel like you always will have a career, because that's like a hard thing to do.
Curious about your thoughts on this, and like leading into 2025, and it's going to be, I think down into politics. Like, what do you think in terms of like brand activism?
Well, you're saying this on the day where on Twitter it was saying repeal the 19th Amendment. We're having this conversation, and I'm like, does any of this even matter if people are trying to repeal the 19th Amendment? We're reversing in progress. That is not the point. And so I had this conversation, and this was something that we talked about with our this client. I'm not going to name drop them here, but the root of what we were talking about was they work in the sort of pseudo advertising space. They create content. A lot of people in the Gen Z demographic see that, and they're like, we understand that we're creating content for like our kids, essentially. And that like kind of bothers us. And we know that there's like a deep seated responsibility here. And so that was like a gigantic conversation that we were having, was what is like the ethos that we have as a company? What are like our ethical values that we don't like create content that is fundamentally making the world worse? How do we slightly make it better or more entertaining, but not worse? And I think we personally at Rogue choose our clients very, very, very specifically. One, we've been burned in the past. So it was just like, we needed money. We took the job, and then it kind of screwed us. But so learning from experience that way, but also, who are the type of people that you want to metaphorically get into bed with? And that's what like most client relationships are. You're going to be working for anywhere between like a couple weeks to months to years. So who are the people that you want to do business with? It's more than just the money. It is a relationship. So what is it that we see like our coworkers more than like our spouses? So clients may be less than that, but it's still a majority of our time thinking about them. So I do think that it's important to pick people that are fundamentally aligned with you and good people.
Definitely. I think some of the hardest conversations we've had to have as a studio is deciding whether or not we can morally take on a client that's come down our plate. And usually we err on the side of caution and say no. If there's even like a little bit of a moral question, then we say like we don't want to do it. Sometimes that's painful because like maybe we do kind of need it for a more successful quarter or what have you. But it is important to not sell your soul.
Consumers are going to want like their brands, their loyalty to this brand to pick a side. I think ultimately it will come down to a little bit of that. I feel like in the coming year, where you kind of have to have a stake in the ground, if you will, for whatever political outcome may happen. I think that ultimately, people are not as like easily bought into the Don Draper ads anymore. I think everyone can kind of see through the gimmicks of what is like greenwashing, for example, and like really trying to avoid that at all costs. So it's like, I think like, I know a lot of companies really want the globe as their audience, but I feel like that's less and less attainable as we kind of grow and these brands grow into these multi-trillion-dollar companies, And I think that's the interesting part where I almost feel like it becomes more of a democratic thing where people will expect this out of the brand that they love, right? Otherwise they'll find another one.
Yeah. This is an interesting point because we were fortunate enough to have a client who thought like radically the opposite, and maybe pun intended there because it was the musician Radical Face. So the site that we made for A Light in the Woods, most of our conversations were around that he wanted the website to literally make most people leave because it's so slow and you're just kind of like clicking around and it's more like a flash game than a website. And that was really the intention. He wanted most people to leave if they weren't a fan or like into like the idea of it, slowing down and just like hanging out. He didn't give a shit. He was so focused on this is not for them. And it really stuck with me. I was just like, oh, I guess probably most brands should really think sort of that way. Like, how do we get the most people out the door? Because we really want the people to like hang out and be like really engaged. Because I mean, if you got like a full coffee shop of like people that are hanging out and sitting and chilling and talking, I think like most of my favorite like cafes in like Brooklyn, like you would have to like fight for a spot to like do work and hang.
Both of those things, what Jeremy was kind of talking about is getting to it. And I think your example is a perfect example of when a client is brave and not afraid to make something cool, maybe at the expense of a larger audience. Whether the way that you just described is like the right way to channel that bravery, I'm not sure. That's maybe a different conversation.
Yeah, totally.
But like that, it really does come down to like we want brave clients. The brave client, like there's so many studios out there. Everyone's doing such good work. How we make extra good work is like if the client lets us. And a lot of times they won't. A lot of times it's about how you make yourself, how you convince them to trust you. Maybe you already have that trust. Maybe it's like a really incredible portfolio just gets you there immediately. And in I think all of our experiences, it's way more than just having really good work. So yeah, brave clients. We need it.
Brave clients like paired with, are also like unique ability to like sell the work. It's become.
Yep.
It's so interesting, like how human this all is, taking people on a journey back to other points about like conceptual thinking and taking people on a ride and selling it. It's like this beautiful chemistry of those two things, like working with these teams, these brave teams want to do cool things. And it's also on us as designers, especially as leaders who are presenting a lot to take these people on a journey and become their friend and sort of, get those ideas across. It's this very like symbiotic thing, these two different partners coming together to put out the good work together, even though they're not the ones doing it. Like we wouldn't be doing it without them. So back to soft skills with Jeremy too, something you just learn over time, like more and more and more. It's definitely can be a really tricky thing to sell something that's, more playful or more wild. When the client's like used to being kind of safe, right? Like the big brands of the world sometimes taking those safer routes. And so
with those bigger brands, and this will be a point that we'll get back to, is some of the clients on your roster being very large. Rogue does not have large clients, so it is a conversation I want to get into. But how do you think that you can promote Bravery in clients who maybe are a little bit timid, or if there's a team of people that you're working with on the client side, if they're a larger organization, how do you, I'm not going to say convince because maybe that is the right word even, but how do you establish that level of trust to kind of get their bravery level up and establish that relationship?
This is a great question. I mean, it's probably multiple factors. I think one thing that can probably take that bravery barometer up a little bit is that initial strategic thinking. Sometimes a good competitive audit and showing people that are also existing in the space doing brave, bold things can help turn the heat up on that, right? Like if you're one big brand, another big brand is doing something that's wild and is getting traction in the market, like that's an easy thing to point to and say, hey, we should probably do something like this. Like if this is successful, if their marketing goals are similar, maybe they're in a similar space, like it's just looking over to your left and right and seeing like what's working. So when you marry stuff to strategic insights like that, that's like a lot easier to sell than just saying like, hey, look at all this cool shit over here we made for like, because we just think it's cool. Yeah. So like marrying those things to strategy. And then I think it's back to some of the soft skills again, like working with teams and sort of becoming good friends with them over time, especially if the project's going long. Like some of the people we've been working with on this website, we've been working with for like 3 months now, and we have a really good rapport. There's a lot of jokes made. Like we've kind of like lowered the sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the elevation a bit, so people are a lot more comfortable together. And I think in those situations too, once people feel comfortable, and you've kind of married that with the strategy and you're starting to sell those ideas, that's when I think you'll see more brave decisions being made.
I mean, honestly, it starts with like our website even and how we try to talk about ourselves. And we definitely had a lot of those conversations when we were trying to, editing like V21 of the like bio of us on our about page. Like, let's give people an understanding that like we create, I don't remember what it says on our home, something about like, maybe it's like irresistible is one of the words we used. It's like, yeah, we want clients who want irresistible work. Like that's what we want to make. So we want clients to want that. We want to tell people the kind of work we want to do so that they come to us for it. The most important thing for us is always doing the best work we possibly can, bringing ambition to every project, whether it's like doesn't warrant it or not, does warrant it or not. And I hope that the better work we do, the better work we get. Mm-hmm. So that's just what we strive for.
You really have to put yourself in their shoes, and they created this brief and they worked really hard on it. If this is high stakes for, whether it's a marketing or design person, it's going to ladder up to someone else. And it really is about what they need to get out of it, and for us, it's a design challenge, of course. And I think the best way to do it is really, rather than just handing off what we think is best, answer the brief in multiple ways, right? I mean, a brief can be answered in a million. There's no reason why it should only be answered in one. And, I think it really is about like understanding the client and what they need out of this, beyond design. Right? Like what is this really going to do for them? And then like building into that, it's like, okay, cool. Like these are the different options of like what this ladders up to, what this ladders up to. And then it's just multiple ways in. And again, as long as you're answering the brief, they're going to, it needs to be variations of extremes as well, right? Like you can show extreme stuff, but that can't be the only thing you do to answer a brief, right? And I think it's important because what you start to find when you do that is you find these middle grounds, right? So then you really work as a partner and not just a vendor. And I think that's what we really try to execute these big organizations, because they answer to a lot of different types of people. And these projects, the hardest part and why you think about why, working with some of those, the Fortune 50 and why they win awards is because they have so many layers to get to that point where you see the work, right? I think that's really the challenge is, and you really want to be an advocate from the get-go for them, as a voice to like help them push their idea through, because they came to you, right? And I think ultimately that's like the cool part. They came to you with a great idea and they want to like make this real.
That's a beautiful thing. I mean, we get to make really interesting things that have an impact on someone else's business so that they can not just keep everyone employed, but they can feed their kids, they can send them off to college, etc. So, I mean, it really is a cool thing that we get to do on a day-to-day basis.
My favorite thing it's very much a blessing and a curse, but if we can get on a text basis with our client, that's the best. Like Jeremy is like on a text basis right now with someone at one of our current bigger projects, and when that happens, like I know it's going to be awesome, because like that kind of dialogue, being able to kind of like mimic like just sitting in the room with these people, chumming it up, being their buddy, is great. And it's very different from a lot of studios like I came from that really try to silo everything and be like much more like almost like a creative butler to their clients, kind of doing their bidding, or like, you know, being a little too formal with the process. Doesn't always breed a lot of fun creativity and collaboration.
That's
And
a really good point.
when we were all at Google Brand Studio, we were the ones hiring agencies, and there were ones that like really did not bring a lot of like personality and friendliness to these projects. So it was a lot harder to work with them. We did not enjoy or look forward to check-ins and meetings with those folks.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting too, even beyond that, like that's the layer between the client and like us, but like we're really transparent with our staff about feedback, and like what I feel like that allows them to do is really like excel faster, you know, because they know what they need to answer to versus what I'm distilling and playing the telephone game. And I think there's something really like holistic about being able to give them the tools of like transparency a little bit, and understanding of like what is the actual feedback here, you know. And I think that it proves a really I feel like it's empowering, you know. And I think that's something that feels really good, you know. As a designer, I felt, you know, sometimes it can be really limiting for, you know, X, Y, and Z reasons, you know, whether they've just been around and this is the way it's been, or, you know, whatever it may be. But I think, you know, as you start to grow and like change is what you want, I'm sure, Britt, you know, want to evolve based on your experience, what Rogue is going to be too. And like, what does that look like? And you kind of distill all of these things that you've basically gathered, right, of your experiences in the past of what you want it to be, you know?
You were talking about like the deformalization of things, and I think that's been like a huge essence to who study hall is. And like, Brent, I'm sure you understand too, like just how you're going to run your studio, like with your employees, with the people around you, how you're going to interact with people. I think we learned, at least I learned so many lessons over the years of like just what not to do, things that felt oogie, things that didn't feel were working great. You know, I've been at agencies and places where it's like very strict and very crimp, and like you almost feel like you shouldn't be speaking out or talking sometimes. You know, it just feels that the atmosphere can be almost like suffocating sometimes in places like that. And I think kind of deformalizing it has just, again, been sort of our secret sauce. I think it's helped culturally speaking, like with the people that we have in the studio. The energy is amazing when we get everyone in the studio. Like once or twice a year, we fly everyone out. We just have everyone in the Oakland office, and like I think we always leave those just feeling really creatively empowered and inspired. And I think it's just come down to just like, don't be an asshole. It's like the biggest thing. Like, just don't be a bad human, and like be nice to people, tell some fucking jokes, and like you guys will all be fine and get along well and do great work. Like, don't do that, you know? Like, yeah. So it's just, I don't know. It's been one of the most rewarding parts of study hall has been that aspect of like not feeling afraid to go to work, you know, not feeling afraid to go in the office when we have the opportunities to. I think it's difficult because we're kind of diasporaed across all the states, but there's a couple people that live in Oakland, so we do get that sometimes, and we do see each other sometimes. But yeah, it's probably been one of the most rewarding things. Is just kind of just threading that deformalization point that Alex made to this end point here.
There was a couple of things that I want to bookmark. So one was like the being diasporaed across like the country, and kind of like post-pandemic work culture and the ups and downs of that. The other thing, let's see, that I wanted to touch on, and we'll play where you get to choose out of these two options, but like What are you guys specifically focusing in on as a studio, whether it's branding or not, for 2025 in the future? Like, are there something that you're leaning into and super excited about, things that you're playing with, that you're exploring besides thick pickles? Maybe you just quit the design game and just go into pickles and CPG, but so you get to choose.
Oh, we could start with the diaspora one, because I think it's fundamentally kind of made us who we are. I think it was a really it's kind of a really bold move. Like when we all leave our jobs at Google in the middle of a pandemic and just decide to start a studio. I'll just say that's kind of a bold thing. And it was like, is this going to work? It was kind of like the first couple months, like we were just putting all the pieces together. And I think I, as a designer, love working around other designers. I love the creative energy that you can spark, especially if the vibes are good team. Then it can be really amazing to just walk past someone's screen and just sit down and talk about design or problem solve together live on the fly. I think that was one of the biggest detractors for me, was like stuck in the pandemic, was not having enough of that energy. And, we still have the office where we do that, but we have people everywhere. We have people even in Europe, sometimes South America too. So like, I think innately we're all going to just live in this new era of the workforce being sort of splintered, but it's also like given us the ability to recruit really good talent, because we all used to recruit locally. Everyone's like, you got to go to the office. Your talent pool is smaller when you do that. And so we found some amazing creatives like all over the States. And when you're like rushing to get like a brief answered and you need to hire like a contractor like super quick, it's a lot easier to go wide like that than to limit yourself to, hey, this contractor has to live within like a 30-mile radius of me right now. That's like very limiting. So it's been really interesting just opening up the doors to just finding talent everywhere.
The old world thinking prior to COVID too is like, business owner has everyone in one place and they love it because it feels good to them, versus empowering the employee to do whatever they want. I mean, I think from like an age standpoint, the remote works really well for people like 28 and above to around like 45, I would say. And then I feel like, because they may have kids, they're getting married, maybe they have family that are in a different spot and they want some support. And like, I feel like the remote culture really put the hands back into it put back the power of this kind of culture into the employee. So I think there's something really like beautiful about it. So it's like, I think we all remember what it used to be like prior, but was it really that great? Because I remember hunkered down in a studio, sleeping there, and like, sure, like that was one thing. And like, I like the idea of it. And I think, but I don't think that's something that's like mandatory, right? I think it's like, if you can have a hybrid work setup, like that's the perfect option, right? I think that's where it is. So I think like we have the studio and I think it's important to us, but I think like being able to be flexible, I think it really, what's crazy about it, it's really just about communication, right? I mean, we have a million ways to get a hold of people now, whether you're calling them, you're huddling them, you're slacking them, you're doing whatever the fuck it is, and there's just a million things. And I think like it's just adopting a new style of communication, because you just have to stay on top of it from that lane. And then if you do that, it really doesn't feel that different, I would say. Sure, the isolation piece is there, but high communication and you could be all around the world.
And maybe this will change with time for us as study hall, but so far, this like traditional idea that like, if you want business from New York companies, you got to set up a New York office. If you want more LA work, you got to set up an LA office. You want London work, you got to set up a London office. We haven't really felt like any client we've ever had has had any desire or need for us to be in the same city as them so far. Everyone's happy as long as like we can make meetings work as long as like time zones are close enough to make meetings work. Everyone's chill. Like most even for all of our like Bay Area clients where we have our office, we have maybe had like 2 in-person meetings in the past 4 years of existing. Like we've gone to in person to a client once, they've come to us once, different clients, it's not really necessary for us right now.
What was your other question? I kind of forgot by now.
So the other question was, what are you guys as a studio like focusing in on? Well, either this year or are putting more kind of eggs in the basket for next year. Is there anything in particular, whether it's motion, 3D, etc.?
We've been circling around this idea that we're a brand expression studio, that language. And what that means to us is every way that a company puts itself out into the world is an expression of that brand, whether it is a video or audio or everything, right? Maybe it's 3D, maybe it's motion, maybe it's a website, an interactive experience, a live event, whatever. We want to help you create it as an expression of your brand. So it really does all like level up to brand for us. But the way we think about it is that like all of these things that we do are to help express that brand in a more robust and interesting way. So the three of us each kind of lead a arm of study hall. Even though I think we're all very much multidisciplinary, but Jeremy leads like traditional brand, Matt leads interactive, I lead motion in 3D. And I think all of our goals is to make the work that come out of our teams way better, right? We're trying. Like I think it's already we're doing it, but
I think it's like the new business side of things for us. I think rather than focusing on like, are we trying to focus more on 3D or what have you? I think it's been like, what are the next clients and places we're like people want to work with? Like we haven't done much CPG, hence the thick pickle. We have some other CPG stuff, kind of like, or not CPG stuff, but like real product stuff too. We tend to work with a lot of like tech products. So I think physical products could be interesting. An alcohol brand could be interesting. And so I don't know if I'm pinpointing exact names of brands, but I think opening up that side of the studio would be like a nice new avenue. Maybe even more title sequences. We were lucky enough to do some cool stuff like that. Ultra City Smiths, like right when the studio was starting, and we haven't gotten any since. And so I think like the biz dev efforts, right? Just like if we want more of that work, we just started boosting the post on Instagram and reminding people if we did it, we might repost it again. And so I think like finding some of those projects that differentiate the portfolio and keep us all hungry, right? Like if we're constantly working on like one type of company, I think that can get stale. So keeping us happy, keeping our designers happy, and finding those new things that allow us to learn and grow too. Like if you're constantly just building tech websites and you get the opportunity to do something really expressive and different, then you're learning again. And so I think it's just like some of those efforts I think are going to be, the term biz dev comes up a lot these days between all of us, and just how do we get that new pipeline going and get those interesting clients in the door?
Well, I mean, that was a question I had for you guys in general. Was you're working with big names, Airbnb for starters, you just put out recently. I'm curious because there's going to be a lot of people who are younger designers that can barely imagine ever working with brands like that may be thinking that you have to be a gigantic company of like 100 people to work with brands like that, and you guys are not, even though it seems like you guys have grown a little bit in the past year. But coming out of Google Brand Studio, starting the study hall, you guys are only 4 years old. I guess my question is you've done quite a lot in 4 years. Maybe it doesn't seem that way to you guys, but take a moment, pat yourselves on the back, whatever you have to do to celebrate yourself right now. But I'm curious how you've been able to attract such gigantic names. What are the strategies or the lessons that you may be able to distill down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, it's more simple than you think. And when you think about the combination of 30 plus years on this call of experience, you really have to just hunker down and you start small. But we worked internally at these companies. We worked at agencies. We worked, kind of across the board. So what that allowed us to do is really set ourselves up for like immediate success, because of the relationships we've already built, like, and spent years and years and years developing internally. And then like when we were ready to make the jump, it wasn't really that big of a leap. So I think you do have to think about, developing those skills first and not, fast tracking. I think, unfortunately, like there's no, like, unless you are incredibly lucky for whatever specific skill set. I think some people, they dial in something that's really unique, whether it's like 3D or like some crazy gradients as an artist, that where maybe that's a little bit different, and that can fast track you to get in front of these brands. But I think as a designer, I mean, just be honest and start small. I mean, if you want to get into technology, there's a ton of options there for you. If you want to get more into CPG, I mean, there's a ton of agencies to try to reach out to. And you just have to be honest about figuring out what you want to start out with. Like, you want to start out with, an award-winning agency. I think there's incredible experience to be had within that. But again, like, you have to think about pay versus what you would do if you started out at like a bigger tech company. It's going to be very different, but the creativity is also different. So I think there's some trajectory in terms of like which one of those you'd like to choose, because I definitely think you could develop your skill set a lot faster creatively at agencies, but there's always a trade-off, like anything in life.
Goes back to something I said before, which is like, just don't be a dickhead. I think I made like a lot of good relationships at these companies. Like, whenever there was like an after hours or like a company whatever dinner, like I would always show up and like always try and sort of like be part of the culture. If you leave a lasting imprint at the places that you work, and then you move on somewhere else, all those people are going to go to new jobs, and that's all stuff sitting on your LinkedIn, sitting in your Rolodex. So after our careers just like progressing like that and starting study hall, it wasn't that hard to start just tapping friends and saying, hey, like, we work together, we're friends, like, we're starting this new thing, check this out. And that's what we did a lot. And so a lot of those big brands are just coming from that. Like, when we left Google, like, so many people went to all these other big companies, and then it's like, hey, got this little thing called study hall over here, come check it out.
And I'll also add that, like, some of these big companies aren't starting out giving us huge like projects that are really like high profile, right? Like, sometimes they're coming to us. I mean, for example, like the first project we worked on for Netflix was a email graphic, like a GIF for one of their emails. It's like really tiny thing just to like test the waters. And progressively they've given us bigger and bigger and bigger projects to the point where like we just branded Netflix Sports, the whole thing. Like, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about that yet, actually. We probably are. We just branded Netflix Sports. We're working on Geek Week right now. Like, we've built that trust from like tiny projects. How we got the intro in the first place, I think we've just been really lucky. Like Matt said, we've had careers where I think, like, if you have a good work ethic and aren't too shy and try to put yourself out there and make friends, not just with like your desk cluster, but maybe like the producers down the hall or the engineers in the next building. Again, like, I think we all started at really, really small places with like where you had to really hustle and the clients were not huge. Nobody's ever heard of them. You move up. Like, for me personally, like, I went from a tiny to a mid to a lot of freelance to Google, and yeah, just luck of like getting into these big places. Then you meet these people, they all kind of spread out, and you maintain those relationships. And at some point, you show good work for a big client, and then the other ones trust you.
The point of the question, and I generally will ask this every once in a while, is I think that it just unveils that there is no secret sauce. Some people, maybe luck has graced them with some riches more than others, but I mean, my trajectory is like, I left an agency out of school like a year and a half in. I did some like internships, but then I just kind of like went freelance and just kind of decided to start Rogue. So, but the point of that is not that I'm like, oh, look how special I am. It's that you do have to garner a network regardless of which way you do it. So if you're going out on your own, like right out of school, you're kind of starting with less of a network. So how do you increase that? Do you have to go to more events? Do you have to like do side projects. You have to reach out to people and try to make some things happen. Lots of cold email, I'm sure. But in your case, like, you have a history or a track record of doing good work at different places. So I'm not saying that it's by no means easier, but you do have some of those network pieces in place, and then you still have to do the work, all that new biz generation.
I think even to build on that, Brett, you bring up a really good point that it's like, in my mind, it doesn't matter necessarily if the project is real. Say, for example, a student comes to me and they want to get hired. They don't really have any work, but maybe they did, quote unquote, a campaign for Google, and it's a personal project. There's good thinking behind it. That's literally all it kind of takes. I mean, again, like, they haven't gone through the rounds of revision, so obviously, like, maybe not senior, but like, there is some capacity of empathy to see someone have a strong work ethic on their own, and that goes so far, I would say, because it is hard work. Like, there's so many rounds of revisions, and you're going to be working late and all the time, and it's just hard. It's design is hard. It's a challenge that we solve every day. And, I think it really comes down to kind of like the work ethic and attitude and not being a dumbass. I think, that is really what can set you apart,
You have 4 years under your belt. I think it's important to highlight the successes, but also what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've had to creatively overcome in that time period in order to kind of get to where you are now and then eventually to where you will be in the future?
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think, like, learning how to be a leader and sort of work your way through a troublesome client, like nightmare client, if you will. Like, there have been moments where we've had some trials and tribulations, if you will. And I think going through that experience as a leader and business owner is a little bit different than dealing with maybe like a tough internal partner, like a producer that you don't get along with or what have you. So, like, getting that project across the line, dealing with all of the back end stuff, like the operations stuff, like sometimes you're getting into tricky conversations with finance or what have you. And I think us coming together and learning how to navigate those so that next time one of those happens, we approach it better and can navigate it better that's probably one of the biggest, like, learnings, is just like that kind of nightmare scenario and, you know, how you deal with it. That's like one of the big things that comes to mind for me.
Growth is really scary. Those moments where you have to figure out like all you can do is decide whether or not you can hire a person based on the fact that you need help, right? This is like a specific scenario or moment that I'm describing, but you definitely need help. You need to hire a person. It's a huge gamble, right? It requires like a lot of believing in yourself, believing in your future. It's not just like, oh, can we afford it? Like, in this moment, we take hiring really seriously because we don't want to be dicks again. Like, we do not want to make a short-sighted decision and create a bad scenario for somebody who's making a big life move to like come join our team. So like when we want to hire somebody, we're hoping that they're in it for the long haul, which means that we have to make a company in a scenario in which we can keep them for the long haul.
Yeah, I mean, at one point we're starting to get bigger britches, but it's like, you were the creative director, you're the senior designer, you're the designer, you're the motion guy, you're the 3D guy, you're the plumber, like, you're all these things, it's crazy sometimes. And it's a whirlwind. I think we're going to look back on that, and, it's just one of those moments that is just like, exciting, right? I think because it's all so new and so fresh, and it's just we're happy to be here. I think we really love it. I think that's a big thing. We bring a lot of passion to this. So
he jokingly says we're the plumber, but we had an incident at the studio and I was the only one there, and the whole shower was backing up with sewage into the office. And I cleaned it, I cleaned it all up. I went to Home Depot, got a bunch of towels, cleaned it all up, and then put all that stuff in the washing machine, started that, came back next day, flooded again. Cleaned it again, happens again. I realized the washing machine was somehow connecting to the sewage and it was flooding poo-poo water all over City Hall.
Official.
So he says it jokingly, but we are the plumber.
Oh yeah. Check that off. Boom, done. I mean,
man.
At this point of the show, I like to pivot to some fast and fun questions. What's something outside of work that's really lighting you up and refreshing your creativity?
I started this thing called Apartment 808, which is like a small music collective of like mostly house producers. There's about 8 of us. And it's like the format is bi-weekly. We drop a sample and then you have 2 weeks to produce like a 90-second minimum track. And I've kind of infused design with it, but like just that musical practice and doing something every 2 weeks and kind of being stuck to it has been such an expander for just like my mental health and just my creativity in general. I think it's really helps me bring like even my best self and better energy to the studio, just having this other outlet. Because as a designer, when you're just like being creative in this one lane all the time, sometimes just doing something a little bit different can like really help just your whole creative self. And so that's just been like this obsession and like new avenue that it's been kind of like a twinkle in my eye for like 6 or 7 years now. And then in New York, I was talking to a friend. He was like, let's just fucking do it. And so we came back after the trip and we just started doing it. We recruited a bunch of people and it's going, and everyone's like accountability's up, just getting everyone to do it every 2 weeks. So yeah, that's just been a really interesting creative exercise. And I wonder like what a design version of that would be like for me, but it's also nice to have separate things.
I spend a lot of time outside.
It doesn't show.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I was being a dick. I apologize.
No, I mean, I have a really high energy dog that requires a lot of time outside. So just trying to embrace that and like finding nice places that, like the other day, I remember I would just like was next to this pond and I watched this whole like symphony of dragonflies just like doing their thing. And I think like finding those moments where I'm not staring at my phone, and just being able to like focus on something that's like happening in nature has been really inspiring. Just like even like 5 minutes of like a centering moment.
Yeah, I mean, I really like to make contemporary furniture. I don't know what it is. It's just getting my hands dirty and getting out of design, like, well, graphic design, I guess, but can't get fully out of design. But I think like, yeah, it's just fun, you know, welding, right? Like sawing, whatever it may be, using all the different tools. It's just like, it's amazing what it does for your vision and how it, like, how good it feels just like coming home from a day of like working on a chair. You know what I mean? Like just as simple as that. Just it's a great feeling.
I'm kind of in the camp of you, Alex, where I like to get outside. I've been paddleboarding a lot recently. I need to try to book a surf lesson and get more into that before I like commit and buy a board and have to get a wetsuit.
Yeah, that I used to surf quite a bit. I grew up down in Southern California. I was like, it was so cold those winter months, and you wake up, you put on your booties, and you're like in the water at 6 a.m. at Rincon, and it's just like, fuck, man, is this it? Like, you know, just like can't even see the waves because there's just so many people, and you're just waiting for the sun to come up so you can start riding waves. It's like it's definitely you gotta dedicate for the winter out there in Cape Cod, I'd imagine.
Most hobbies that people choose are creative ones. Like I would think like the traditional stuff, you know, pottery,
cooking.
Yeah. Like if somebody's an accountant, their hobby is probably creative. This is my uninformed opinion. But so like our jobs, at least for me, it does fulfill that like need that a hobby might, right? And the past weekend, I was like, I had like this desire to that like kind of hobby-esque desire to do something creative. I just ended up making a bunch of cool 3D stuff for a client that like we're in the process of working on a scope for. And it was really fun and felt really fulfilling and creative, even though it also was useful for the business.
That's a beautiful place to maybe stick a pin in it. Maybe there'll be a round 2 where we can dive into some other juicy topics at a later date. Thank you so much for being on the show.
10 out of 10.
Beautiful. I'll take that. And so to the audience out there, remember that we're all legendary and have an amazing story of our own. So on that journey, take the time to be kind, don't be a dickhead, grind and unwind, and let's make the world a better and more creative place. Guys, thanks so much. I don't know if I can title this for YouTube, Don't Be a Dickhead, as the title, but I might try it out. Let's do some A/B testing.